In the previous video, we took care of a lot of the codes that we're going to need between outputting the results and actually inputting new data into our database. In this section, we're going to tie up a lot of the loose ends so that we can actually input data directly into our database. If we come across the NetBeans, the very first thing that we want to do is to output all of the goal scorers which we have in our database. In our database, they're actually stored under this report data or results input data. We can copy this across actually. And we're not going to be able to output this as an echo, we're going to have to file dump this. The specific location of them is under goal scorers. So if we just output this now and then kill our script, we're not going to see anything. And that's because we need to do this outside of the select statement. So we'll just do this up here, inside of the TD. And if we refresh again, we can see that we have our output players here. And we only have one player who has scored a goal in this case, which is why we only have one element. So in order for us to access this actual data, we're going to need to put this into a for each loop. So if we delete this, and we will actually put this into a separate TD, so that we're not confusing things. We're going to have an extra row across the top of the table which is going to have all of the current goal scorers listed in it. And so to do that within our for each loop which we're about to create, we will just output the table data element. So for each, we're going to use this as our array. And then we're just going to echo out TD, and then we can add in the value. So if we have the player ID here, for example, and we go back to our page and refresh it, we're going to get the output of our player ID listed. Now we did say that we want this to be above these input sections, and so we need to add a new row into our table. So I'm just going to add a new row. Like that. And so it's above the actual input section as we intended. Now we don't need to limit ourselves to just using the player ID here. We could use any other field, so we have access to the team data, for example. But we're not going to look at that in much detail just yet. The simplest way to do this will simply be to copy across this select statement from below and feed this into the same section. I'm also going to escape the PHP so that we can interact with the PHP elements and the HTML elements separately. We also want to limit this to just being for the player that we're actually selecting. So I'm going to split this line up so that we can manipulate that properly. So before we close this option section, we're just going to have an if statement. And we're just going to compare if the value player ID is equal to the player ID. Then we're also going to echo out selected. And that will select the player for us if they are in that list. So if we also remove this var dump and refresh our page, you can see that we're getting this error message, and that's still relating to this line here, but we can delete that. And because we've deleted that line, we also need to add in the table data elements. So if we refresh again, we're going to get this additional drop down box. Now the next thing I want to do is to actually move this button so that we are only able to remove elements which already have a goal scorer recorded for them. So the easiest way to do that is to simply move the button from down here up just after that select statement. If we refresh our page again, that's going to tidy that section up for us as well. And we can go one step further and actually disable this field so that we're not able to select the field once the goal scorer is already recorded. If we wanted to change a goal scorer, we would have to then remove the goal scorer and then add a new one in. So we can do that simply by typing disabled into the relevant field, into this selected field here. So if we refresh the page again, we're not able to click into that field anymore. Now it's important that you use disabled and not read only here, because of the way that the forms actually pass the information across when you submit them. If you use read only, that information will be passed across into our submitted form, whereas we only want to pass across the new element which we're going to submit. So the next thing that you may notice is the fact that this is currently saying no selection, despite the fact that we do have a goal scorer whose ID is 40. If we inspect the element, however, we can see that we don't actually have a player ID with player ID 40. We go straight from 33 to 42. And this is because when we were creating our stretch league methods earlier on, we specified that the fixture ID is always going to be 1 and not dynamic. So to address this fact, all we're going to do is copy across this code which we wrote earlier. But we're actually going to bind this across rather than using the code itself. And the reason that we're going to bind this rather than passing the codes directly into here is simply because we're trying to access an array within an array. And if you pass that across directly, PHP won't understand what's happening. If we go back across to our page and refresh again, we can see that this time we're only going to have one player, because this is the only player who's selected at the moment as being eligible to play in this game in our fixture players table. So because our selections at the moment are very limited, I'm going to change the system date on my system back to the date of the very first fixture. And I'm also going to change the referee ID to 28, who happens to have been the referee who referees the first game. We can also see that we have 4 selections now because in this first game we had 4 goals. The selections, however, are going across horizontally instead of being included in one single element. And so to solve this, if we go back across to our input page, we can include all of these in a span. And move the table data element outside of the scope of this while loop. So if we go back to our page again and refresh, we can see that it's all going to be displayed in this first table data element, but we want these to be stacking on top of each other vertically, so instead of a span we can change that to a div, which if we refresh again, is going to give us the desired outcome. So the next problem that I can see is the fact that all of these elements are showing us no selection. This is because when we copied this across, we accidentally included this quotation mark after we added the word selected, which means that we were adding the word selected to our ID instead of adding the selected to the actual option within our select dialog box. So if we refresh this now, we can see that we have the actual players selected. The next problem is the fact that we have all of them selected on the left hand side and no goal scorer selected on the right hand side. I happen to know that this result was 2-2, and so we should have 2 boxes on either side. So the easiest way for us to address this will be in our Stretch League class. If we rework our goal scorer data section, we'll be able to output the data split between the home team and the away team. So to do this, we simply need to create a variable called teams, and we're going to select the home team and the away team. From the fixtures table, where the fixture ID is equal to the fixture ID. We're then going to duplicate this line, the results line, and we're going to add home and away. So in this first section where we have the home team, we're just going to amend the where clause to include and team ID is equal to team ID. And we'll copy that across to our second section as well. We're then going to, in our array of variables that we're going to bind across, team ID is going to be teams home, and the same will apply to the second one, except we will have the away section here. Now, rather than outputting this straight away, because we're definitely going to get an error message, I'm just going to var dump this. And then kill the script. If we come back across to our page and refresh, we can see that we're going to have these two sections. It hasn't, however, recognised the two different indices, the home and away indices. So I'm also going to var dump teams. And if we refresh our page again, we'll see that this hasn't actually worked, and it should be fixture, the singular. And so if we try again, refresh the page, we do get the two output values. However, we haven't accounted for the fact that this is going to be inside of an array, and so all we need to do to combat that is add a 0. Because we're always going to be looking in the first index. And of course we're using home team ID and away team ID, not home and away. And so we can correct that as well. So refreshing again gives us our list separated into home and away, with the relevant scorers being included in each of the two sections. So if we go back and delete these var dumps on the die, we know that we're definitely going to get an error message at this point. So all we need to do is go back into here and simply, for this first one, include the home index. So if you refresh our page again, we're hopefully going to get just the 2 home goal scorers. Now we're going to need to repeat this entire section for our away team. And so all I'm going to do is copy and paste this entire section, including the actual output section. And replace the version which we already have. And we will also need to change this home to away. So if we refresh our page again, we've mostly got it right. We still need to adjust our table rows. I'll cut this, and we're going to have our first section. We're then going to have, for the moment, a second section which is going to be blank. And then we're going to have our away section. In our second row, we're then going to have the home select input screen, then the center submit button, which is here, and then the away goal scorer input screen. So if you refresh again now, we've got exactly what we would expect. We don't, however, really need this submit button anymore. In fact, we can turn each of these buttons into submit buttons. So the only thing that we need to remember is that we need to convert all of our buttons into type submit instead of type button. So we can delete this center element. We'll just format everything. We can delete this empty column from our goal scores, which we haven't actually implemented yet, as well as deleting the empty column from our top section. So if we refresh our page again, so now that we're done with our goal scorer section, we can actually populate this section down here, which is the goals scored for each team. And to do this, it's very easy. All we need to do is to output the count of the goal scorers for the home team, and repeat this for the away team. And of course we need to echo these two out as well, not just count them. And so if we go back to our page and refresh, we're going to get the score for this game. We're not going to worry about styling these just yet, we will come back and touch on that again later. I just wanted to actually focus on the functionality for now. Before we're happy with this section, there's 2 more things that we need to do. When we converted these to buttons, or rather the paper buttons within Polymer, we lost the automatic submit facility, and so we need to add that back in. We then need to look at all of the data which is being submitted and convert it into the actual format that we're going to need to actually submit it in the SQL format. And then finally we're going to save all of the data into the database, or whatever changes it happens to be in the case of deleting data. So previously we had our form within our actual custom element. In order to make things easier for us, we're actually going to move this outside of the custom element. I'm also going to delete this extra column. And and I'm going to put the form in the actual body of the text. This will mean that we're able to access it easier later on. So the next step is to actually add an on-click event to each of our buttons. And that on-click event is simply going to be document. So it's get elements by ID. And we're going to get the main form. So we're simply going to submit it. We're going to need to use single quotes here to make sure that we're not going to conflict. And because we've named our form, we're going to need to name it up here as well. So for each of our other buttons, we're going to do the exact same thing. So we'll copy this. And we have another button here. We have one here. And we have one here. If we refresh our page now, each of these buttons is actually going to submit the form to us, as we would hope it to. We'll ignore those errors, we'll look at them again in a moment. We want to do more than simply just submitting the entire form, however. At the moment, if we click one of the delete buttons, we're not able to determine which entity it is that we want to delete, or indeed whether we want to add a new player. And so I'm going to narrow down the actual scope for each of these forms, and we're going to have multiple forms, one for each specific section. So if we comment all of this out, we can begin at the bottom, because this will be the easiest to implement. So all we need to do is within this table data element, we create a new form and close it out here. This form will be specific to the away add section, and so we're going to call it away add form. And we'll change this section to match that. Now when we're adding a new piece of information, we're going to need three specific things. We're going to need the goal scorer's ID, the team ID, and the fixture ID. And so we can just replace these values. As we're going to need them. So the fixture ID, we can establish that from we're going to need to escape it into PHP first and echo out. But the value is just simply fixture ID. If we do the same here for the team ID, in this case it's going to be the away team ID. Which we're going to need to get from the away team name. Now we don't actually have access to the away team ID here, and so we'll come back to that when we are processing the data later on. Next up, we don't need this new hidden element for the player ID. We have access to the select statement, and so we can just name this player ID, and when it's submitted it will pass its value across because we have the option ID specified. So let's try to submit this data across. It's obviously going to hit this section, which is going to check whether run is set, which it will be, and then it will come across to this update results section. We're also going to var dump post just to help us debugging, because we obviously haven't. So if we refresh the page, make a selection and add, we can see that we have this information passed across to us. It has passed across, however, the player ID as the actual player's name, which is not the information that we want. And so if we come back across to the input, we can change ID to value. If we go back and resubmit this form, it's going to pass across the right value. So we just need to make these changes to our home team add section. So I'll format that, and we're going to copy across this section into here and create a new form. We're going to set the name of this select to player ID, and we're going to change the ID to value. This time we're going to change this to the home team name, and we're going to change the name of the form to home add form, as well as changing the name of the submit to home add form, and that needs to go above the end of the form. So if we go back, refresh, make a selection and submit our home form, we're going to get the run true, fixture ID being 1, team name and the player ID. So we now need to do basically the same thing again, but for our delete section. And because this is dynamic, we're going to actually create this at the very lowest level. So this will be the home delete form. And the form needs to be inside of the div as well. So when we're deleting data, we're going to need the exact same information again. We're going to need the player name, the team name, the fixture ID, and that's all. But we're also going to need to change these options to being the value. This will, however, give us a problem, because each of these forms is going to have the same name, and we're potentially going to have multiple forms. For example, we will potentially have one form for this and one form for this second line, which will have the same ID. Because of the possible complexities involved with multiple players scoring for different games, if multiple games are being displayed, as well as the same player scoring multiple times, we're not going to worry about any fancy way to identify the forms. All we need is a unique number, and so I'm just going to create a counter, and we're going to append that counter onto the end. So at the very top, we're just going to set count equals 1, and then in the form itself we're going to echo out and then increase the count. And we'll even put an underscore at the end of it. And we can actually move this count to the end of this loop. Because we're also going to need to echo out the count down here as well. And so we don't want it to be changing while we're actually working on it. So if we save that and go back across to our browser and refresh, I'm going to go ahead and actually inspect these elements so that we can check that the counter has been implemented properly. We can see here that the form ID is called home delete form 1, and it has been created here as home delete form 1. If we go down to the second element, we can see that this one's called home delete form 2, and it has been created as home delete form 2. And so we know that these forms are all going to be unique. And so we need to now go ahead and implement the same thing, but for the away team scores. So at the very bottom, I'm going to increase the counter again. I'm going to drag this section down. And we're going to rename this away delete form. And we'll copy the form section down as well. And change the name of this to away delete form. And finally, we'll put the div down and close out the form. So if we go ahead back across to our browser, reload this, we can test out our home form, which is passing across the run, the fixture ID and the team name. The player ID hasn't passed across on this occasion, which we'll investigate in a moment. And the same is true for the away team. And the reason it hasn't passed across is we haven't named this field. And we also need to change this to value. And so the reason that it's not passing the actual value across on any occasion is because these are currently disabled, whereas we need them to now be read-only. So if we refresh again, if we submit any of these buttons now, the player name, this shows actually reads player ID, but it's passing across the player ID for us. And so we can change the names back to player ID. So if we submit one of these forms, we can have a look at these error messages now. And these are simply because we're trying to get data which we're not actually passing across anymore. In our results model, we're trying to access these pieces of information. If we comment them out and reload the page, those error messages go away. We do, however, want this whitelist approach rather than passing across all of the post data, simply because this allows us to have confidence in our information which we're receiving, and which we're then going to pass into our database. So we're going to just reuse these pieces of information. So we've got the team ID, the player ID, and the fixture ID. Because our player ID is passed across as an integer, we can take advantage of that fact and not actually have to worry about filtering it. Or rather, we can filter it here and then not worry about it later on. We're also not passing across the value home team name anymore, we're just passing across a value called team name. So if we refresh our page again, we can see that our data array is the information that we actually want. And this is going to be true no matter what form field we submit, whether it's a deletion or an addition. And so we can delete this post output because we're not going to use that now. We're always going to rely on these filtered, whitelisted variables. And we can do one more thing to help us along our way, which will be to actually change the value of the run variable based on what it is that we want to do. So in the first instance, we want to delete. In the second instance, we also want to delete. We then want to add, or rather insert, and insert in the final case as well. So if we reload our page and resubmit this, we can then go ahead and actually filter our run variable as well, which means in our results model we can just sanitize that filtered input, reload our page, and we know that we're going to insert in this case. If we click one of the delete buttons, we know that we're going to delete. And the same is true no matter which button it is that you actually use to submit the form. So the next thing is to obviously go ahead and create the functions within our stretch league to actually delete and insert these records. So we're going to have three variables: the team ID, fixture ID, and the player ID. And we're going to use our insert command, which we created in our database library, which is here. So we're going to select the table and then pass across an array of all of the actual values, which is going to be in this format. So if we close this, we can create a new database. This database insert. It's going to go into the goalscorer table. And we're only going to worry about one at a time. And so we're just going to say team ID is going to be the team ID. Player ID is going to be player ID. And the fixture ID will be the fixture ID. We're also going to need to create a function to delete. Which is basically going to be the exact same thing, except we'll use the word delete instead of insert. And if we go across into our database library again, so instead of an array, we're going to actually need to specify this as a string. which is easy enough to do. It's just a matter of concatenating all of these together. So this will eventually be converted into a string, which is the team ID is equal to team ID, player ID is equal to player ID, and fixture ID is equal to fixture ID. So if we go ahead back to our model, now that we have this, we can simply plug all of that data that we've already created into our functions which we've just created now. And seeing as we're going to pass this directly across, we don't need to put it all into the data container. We can just create variables for each one straight away. And because we also have access to our run, we can create a simple if statement. If run is equal to insert, perform that action, and we're going to use else if rather than just else, because we could have other information passed across and we don't want to always perform an action. We only want to perform an action if the correct information is passed across. But before we actually test this out, I'm just going to echo this out just so that we can see whether it's worked or not. So if we reload and you try to delete Matthews from here, you can see that we get this error message, undefined variable data. So we can delete that. If we go back and reload, we can see that we only have one goal scorer. We can try to add Matthews back in and we get an error message. When we created our new structure to insert elements, we should have left out these semicolons, or rather these colons. So if we delete those and save it again, and we go back and try to insert Matthews again, we're going to get the page load properly, which is what we would expect, which is just the output confirmation. If we go back into the results model and delete this die and reload our page, we're going to get two inserts just because of the first one, which shows us the 0, and then because we hadn't displayed this page again, it showed us as inserting it again once. So we can go through that entire process again. So we just add Matthews. You can also see that the scores are updating. It's also worth noting that because all of the information in our database is live at the moment, if we look at our player table, the results table, we can see that this game was 2-2. If we add another goal scorer and go back to our results, we can see that it's automatically changed here, as well as updating the actual positions. So at the moment, with it being 3-2, Queen's Head is in 6th position. If we go ahead and remove this extra goal scorer, it goes back to 2-2. And the win which showed previously now shows as a draw. This section has taken quite a lot of time to actually get right, but fortunately this is probably the most complex of the input sections available, because everything on the form is so dynamic. In the next section we're going to look at creating an edit screen for all of our team specific data, which will allow us to update and edit the manager, the grounds name, the capacity, the address, the contact number and the logo of each team. So make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out. It's actually changed the foreground colour and not the background colour, which is not what we wanted. So if we change that to background colour and refresh again, it's going to fit into our colour scheme a lot more. So you can see at the moment everything is currently listed horizontally from left to right. This is not how we want it to be displayed on our actual final version of the form. We want each element to be listed one on top of each other,